A fig falls off a tree and lands in a leaf litter. Nothing eats it. 2 days go by. There were already yeasts living on its skin. They start eating the sugar inside it. They turn that sugar into two things: carbon dioxide and ethanol. Ethanol is a poison. It is also a smell that travels a long way through warm, wet air. And in a forest, that smell means one thing: sugar. Right here, free. Any animal that can smell it and survive it eats better than the animals that cannot. This episode is about why you are one of those animals. Because the taste for alcohol was not invented by civilization. It is roughly 10 million years old, and part of it is written into an enzyme in your liver. Start at the deep end. In the year 2000, a biologist called Robert Dudley proposed what he called the drunken monkey hypothesis. Ripe fruit ferments a little all by itself. Not much, usually under 1%. But that trace of ethanol drifts on the air, and it drifts much further than the smell of the fruit itself. So for a primate looking for ripe fruit in an enormous green forest, ethanol is a beacon. Critics pushed back, and they had a point. Wild fruit does not hold enough alcohol to make anything drunk. But Dudley was never claiming drunk monkeys. He was claiming attracted ones. The hard evidence arrived in 2015, and it came from bringing a dead enzyme back to life. Matthew Carrigan and his colleagues were interested in an enzyme called ADH4. It sits in your throat, your stomach, and your gut, and it is the first thing alcohol meets on the way in. Using the primate family tree, they worked out what the gene for it must have looked like at various points in the past. Then they built those ancient enzymes in a laboratory and tested them. For most of primate history, ADH4 was close to useless against ethanol. Then, around 10 million years ago, in the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, one amino acid changed. That single change made the enzyme roughly 40 times better at breaking ethanol down. And it happened at about the moment our ancestors began spending more time on the ground, which is exactly where the fermenting fruit is. Fruit in the tree is fresh. Fruit on the floor has been working for 2 days. So it is not that humans found alcohol and took a liking to it. Our ancestors were eating it in small doses before there was anything you would call a human. And we're not the only ones still doing it. In Malaysia, the pin-tailed tree shrew feeds on the fermented nectar of the burden palm, which can reach nearly 4%. It drinks it every night of its life. It does not appear to get drunk. In Guinea, at Basso, chimpanzees raid the raffia palms that villagers tap for sap. The sap ferments in a container overnight. The chimps dip in folded leaves as sponges and drink. Some of them then behave in ways the researchers describe, very carefully, as consistent with intoxication. So the appetite is ancestral. It is not ours, and it never was. What our species actually invented is something else: control. Deciding when it happens, how much happens, and who is allowed to have it. Which raises an immediate problem, because alcohol is a liquid, and liquids do not survive. There is no such thing as a fossil beer. What survives is the pot, and whatever's soaked into the walls of the pot. So this field runs on chemistry. Grind a sample of ancient pottery, and look for the fingerprints of what was inside it. Calcium oxalate, which settles out a barley beer and crusts the inside of a vessel. Brewers today call it beer stone. Tartaric acid, which in that part of the world essentially means grapes. Beeswax markers, which mean honey. And honey plus water plus time means mead. Patrick McGovern's laboratory spent decades on this, and the results push the deliberate stuff a very long way back. At Jiahu, in Hunan province in China, pottery jars from around 7,000 years before the Common Era hold residues of rice, honey, and fruit. If you watch the episode on music, you already know Jiahu. It is the same site that produced the bone flutes that still play in tune, which give you a fairly complete picture of an evening. At Haji Firas Tepe, in the Zagros Mountains of Iran, a jar from about 5,400 BC held tartaric acid and tree resin. Resonated wine, 6,000 years before anybody thought to complain about Retsina. That one is argued over, and fairly. Tartaric acid tells you grapes were in the jar. It does not, by itself, prove they fermented. So the cleanest case is not a residue at all. It is a building. At the Arini 1 cave in Armenia from around 4000 BC, there's a shallow clay basin that drains into a vat sunk in the floor. Around it, grape seeds, dried vines, pressed skins, and the chemical that gives red wine its color. That is not a trace of wine. That is a winery with plumbing. But everything I have described so far comes after farming. Which raises the question this episode really turns on. Did the drink come after the grain? Or did the grain come after the drink? In 1953, an archaeologist named Robert Braidwood put that question to his colleagues in print. A botanist, Jonathan Sauer, had suggested that people first domesticated cereals not in order to make bread, but in order to make beer. Braidwood thought this was probably wrong. He organized a published symposium about it anyway, under the title, "Did Man Once Live by Beer Alone?" The argument for it is not silly. Wild cereal is a miserable crop. The grains are tiny, they are locked inside husks, and the stalk shatters and drops them before you can gather them. As a way to get bread, that is an enormous amount of labor for a thin return. As a way to get a drink that changes people, gathers them, and keeps the arithmetic looks different. For decades, that was all it was. An argument. There was nothing in the ground. Then, in 2018, a team led by Li Lu published Something from a Cave in northern Israel. Raqefet Cave was a Natufian burial ground, about 13,000 years old. Hunter-gatherers, no farming anywhere on Earth yet. Cut down into the bedrock floor of that cave are stone mortars. One of them is a deep, narrow, boot-shaped hole. Inside them, under a microscope, are starch granules, damaged in a very particular way. Grain that has been soaked until it sprouts, then heated, then mashed, comes out looking different from grain that has merely been ground. The team argued they were looking at the residue of malting and mashing, which is to say brewing, in a cemetery, 13,000 years ago, before wheat was domesticated. It is contested, and it deserves to be. The sample is small, and starch can be damaged in more than one way. But it is not the only hint. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, that famous ring of carved stone pillars raised by people who are not yet farmers, they're limestone vats. The largest hold about 160 liters. Some of them carry the oxalate residue. Göbekli Tepe has almost no houses. Nobody seems to have lived there. People came, hauled stone, built something enormous, ate and drank, and went home again. That is a great many people to feed on a schedule for no wage. The strong version of this story, that beer caused agriculture, is almost certainly too tidy to be true. But even the cautious version is remarkable. Alcohol is not a luxury that turns up once a society has money to waste. It is standing right there in the doorway, at the ceremonies, at the exact moment everything changes. So what was it doing there? 3 things, and all of them are ruthlessly practical. The first is storage. Grain rots, and grain gets eaten by mice. Beer is grain turned into liquid, made mildly antiseptic, and made worth guarding. The second thing is other people. Anthropologists who study feasting, Michael Dietler among them, keep finding the same machine in different places. You cannot pay somebody to help clear your field because there is no money and there is no wage. So you brew, you throw a work feast. People come, they work, they drink, and now they owe you one. Drink converts a surplus you could never eat into labor you could never otherwise buy. The third thing is that a vat has a deadline. Fermentation takes days, and then it spoils. A brew forces everybody to be in one place on one particular day. That is a calendar made out of yeast. Once writing arrives, all of this becomes visible because people started writing it down. In the earliest tablets from Uruk, the receipts from the last episode, one of the commonest signs is a jar lying on its side. Beer. Workers were paid in it, measured out by the day, and the accounts were kept. There is a Sumerian hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, from around 1800 BC. It is a working recipe with a tune on it. You can follow the instructions. People have. And on Mesopotamian seals, you see 2 people leaning over one large jar, each drinking through a long reed straw. That is not decoration. Ancient beer was a thick soup with husks floating on the surface, so you drank it from underneath. On the other side of the world, the same machine invented independently. In Peru, the Wari built a brewery on top of a mountain called Cerro Baúl. It made chicha from maize and the berries of the pepper tree, in batches of hundreds of liters, for feasts of hundreds of people. When the site was finally abandoned, the elite held one last ceremony, drank, smashed their cups, and burned the brewery down on purpose. Nobody bothers to burn down a building that does not matter. Now the bill because there is one, and it would be dishonest to skip it. Ethanol is a toxin, and your body takes it apart in 2 steps. First, it becomes acetaldehyde, which is considerably more poisonous than the alcohol was. Then a second enzyme clears the acetaldehyde away. If that second enzyme is slow, the acetaldehyde sits in you. You go red, your heart races, and you feel dreadful. Roughly a third of people with East Asian ancestry carry a version of that gene, which does exactly that. It appeared within the last few thousand years and spread quickly, which usually means it was doing something useful. What exactly is still argued about. It also makes alcoholism far less likely, for fairly obvious reasons. There is a second variant common across East Asia and parts of the Middle East, which speeds up the first step instead. Both are recent. Both are still spreading right now, which means something genuinely strange is true. Our species is still evolving in real time in response to something we made ourselves. And to be plain, alcohol kills millions of people. This is not a video that thinks drinking is clever. It is a video about why the pull is so old and so difficult to explain away. Which brings us to the last part, and it is the part that surprised me most. For almost the whole history of drinking, there was a hard ceiling on how strong a drink could be, and it had nothing to do with us. Yeast makes ethanol. Ethanol poisons yeast. Somewhere between about 12 and 16%, the yeast dies in its own waste, and the fermentation simply stops. That number is not a custom, or a taste, or a law. It is the death of a species of fungus. And for roughly 10,000 years, that was the strongest drink on Earth. Every beer, every wine, every mead, everywhere capped by the tolerance of something too small to see. Distillation breaks the ceiling, and distillation is shockingly recent. The technique is worked out by alchemists in the Islamic world, and by the 13th century a physician in Italy, Taddeo Alderotti, is describing careful, repeated distillation of wine. What comes out is called aquardance, burning water, and it is sold as medicine. So put the two ends of this story next to each other. Your ADH4 enzyme was tuned 10 million years ago for fruit lying on a forest floor at well under 1%. It has had less than 1,000 years to think about 40. That is the whole modern problem in a single sentence. The appetite is ancient and the dose is brand new. We did not invent the wanting. We inherited it from something that walked on the ground and ate what had fallen. What we invented was the ability to make it happen on purpose on a chosen day at a strength no fruit has ever reached. And then to sit down together and drink it, which is the part we were doing all along.